Good morning. Happy Thursday, the next to last day of school. We are reading, first off, from a book called Who Was Thomas Jefferson? It was written by Dennis Brindell Frayden, illustrated by John O'Brien. Now, we learned yesterday that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Curiously enough, everybody else signed it. They signed their first name and their last name, but Thomas Jefferson, when he signed it, he just wrote TH. Curious. Now you see this signature right here, John Hancock. John Hancock wrote it so much, his name so much larger than anybody else's, and there was a reason for that. The reason was he wanted the King of England to see his name without having to read it with his glasses. That's why his name is so big. And John Hancock is actually a saying we say sometimes when we want somebody to sign their name. We just go, write your John Hancock right there. That's where that came from. Now, after he signed the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson was ready to go home. He missed his family and he felt like he was needed in Virginia. And then he went back home. But he became a member of Virginia's new state legislature, the lawmakers. He served there for 3 hard years. And it just seems like maybe we were not going to win the war against England. Now, Jefferson ran for governor, the leader of the state of Virginia, in June of 1779. Our governor, our leader of the state, is Governor Stitt. Now, he was elected and he held office for 2 years. Now, he was a brilliant thinker, a marvelous writer, but he wasn't a good wartime governor. That's because probably he had a heart of peace. And it was hard to think about getting men the things they needed to fight in a battle. Because of that, the state of Virginia was unprepared when the British invaded. That means they came into the state in 1781. Now, in June, the British were all over Virginia, and his time as governor was ended. Now, he went back to his home at Monticello, and a messenger came to give him some bad news. The British was coming to get him, to capture him. Now, he sent his wife and his children away so they would be safe, and he walked into the woods to see if he could spot an enemy. There's the messenger right here. There's his wife and children going. He didn't see anybody, and he was going to go back to get some papers out of his house, but before he did that, he took out his telescope, and he looked, and he looked, and he looked over at Charlottesville. Charlottesville's about 2 miles away from Monticello, not very far away. The town was crawling with British troops. That means there were soldiers everywhere. That telescope probably saved his life. The British then took over Monticello. Now, if Jefferson had gone back home, he probably would have been killed. He met up with his family and took them to another plantation he owned about 80 miles from Monticello. He was a wealthy man as far as owning land, wasn't he? He had a lot of land. A few months after they left, the Americans won a victory right there in Virginia. Now, Ben Franklin had convinced France to help America fight Britain. France is just kind of below Great Britain. In October of that year, George Washington's troops, along with the French soldiers helping, beat the British at a town called Yorktown, Virginia. This meant that the Americans had won the war for independence. And no one was happier than Thomas Jefferson, and it should have been a happy time for him. But it wasn't, because some people accused him of not doing enough to protect his state from the British. And they hurt his feelings pretty badly. And then he fell off a horse and broke his wrist and had other injuries, and he couldn't leave his house. And then the next year his wife died. He was absolutely heartbroken when she died. Now, friends such as James Madison was one of them. James Madison, number 4 president. In 2nd grade, you'll learn a lot about James Madison. Very fascinating man. his friend said, you should get back into helping run the government, politics, helping making decisions for our country. Maybe that will help your heart. And Jefferson goes, well, okay. Then he was elected to the Continental Congress. Remember, they were lawmakers. And he did that for about 6 months. And he was on a lot of committees and wrote a lot of papers. And then they gave him an important job. They go over to France and help make agreements, treaties, to help us become friends with other countries. Now, he took his oldest daughter with him. The other 2 children were at home. But once he was in France, he found out that Ben Franklin resigned as a U.S. minister to France. So Jefferson took over that job. Jefferson knew some French. So that was his job. He wanted to make sure that France and the United States became friends. He kept in touch with French officials, that means important people, and traveled around the country. Now, things were not going so great at home. His daughter died. He didn't find out about that for a long time. And he finally went back home. There was a storm that they barely made through. The ship caught on fire. It was a tough time. But that's the end of chapter 4. Let's talk about our vocabulary for today. Confidently, that's with confidence. That means being sure of yourself. If I say, do you need help with your math? You go, oh no, Mrs. Frieder, I can do it myself. You are confident. You are sure. Okay. Our example sentence says, at the concert, the boy confidently sang the song. Dull means boring or not exciting. Here's our example sentence. The movie was very dull and very long. Sign language. Sign language is saying not with your mouth, but with your hands. You know that this means I love you. And we can say the alphabet like this is A, B, C. Oh, can you see that? Yeah. That's where you use your hands. Sometimes people use it when they are deaf. Sometimes people use it when their voice, for whatever reason, doesn't work. Some people use it kind of as a secret language. I know some people that have done that. Maybe you want to communicate across the room, but you can't use your words, so that you would spell it out with your hands or use some other way to communicate. If you're not spelling the words, maybe you're using symbols like this instead of spelling out I love you with your hand, then you would just use symbols like I love you. Our example sentence is, while the story was being read out loud, someone else told it in sign language. Waterfall, that's water falling down from a higher point, a cliff or something like that. Now remember that there were 3 jobs that Lewis and Clark were supposed to do. Number 1, they were supposed to collect plants and animals. Number 2, make friends with the Native Americans. And number 3, find a water route all the way to the Pacific Ocean, clear across the country. Yesterday you learned about Sacagawea. And you learned that she was hired as a guide and a translator and interpreter. And she helped with the Native Americans. She was actually Shoshone, but she could talk some other Native Americans, speak some other Native American languages. Today our read aloud is called Rivers and Mountains. And here is your job. Find out why one of the tasks of the 3, which one was impossible to accomplish. And I will see you tomorrow, the last day of school. I love you. Bye.